my great-grandmother was the one that's instrumental in bringing us here. My great-grandmother came from originally North Carolina. She was a Hamlin. Her family history dates all the way back to Scotland. And she got married to a Galloway, which their family history went back to Scotland also. And they came from from North Carolina, Eden, North Carolina, to Danville, Virginia. And that's where my father was born. My great-grandmother came north because she worked for a very wealthy family. And they had a business in New York, and they lived in Long Island and New York. And her brother lived in East Rutherford, and she used to come over here to visit. Our history in this area goes back to 1880. My great-grandmother came here in 1880. And she came to visit her brother who lived in East Rutherford, Charles Reynolds was his name. And my father's oldest brother and oldest sister were born in Rutherford on Union Avenue, Rutherford. My father was born in Danville. And of the siblings, there were 5 of them, and 3 of them were born in Danville, and the 2 oldest were born here in Rutherford. And that's how they came here. And my father met my mother here in Rutherford. He came here north, and he lived in Inglewood when he originally came here. And from Inglewood, I don't know exactly the story, but he started coming to Rutherford to see the girls, I guess, and it was a big thing on Sundays when everybody would gather after church. And I guess that's how he met my mother. My mother lived on Agnew Place in Rutherford at the time when he came here. And that was in the teens. And my mother lived down there until 1927 when they got married in the church across the street. And my grandmother bought the house next door, which was 34 Elm Street. And I lived there until I went into the service. And I stayed, and when I came out of the service, I stayed there until I got married, and I moved. I bought a home in West Orange. I lived there for a while. Well, it was a far cry from what it is today. It was a beautiful street full of trees. Half the trees are gone. And as you know, Rutherford is known as the town of trees. And it was a very close-knit community. I knew every family on Elm Street, Wood Street on this side, Grove Street on that side, and 3 or 4 other streets. It was a mixed neighborhood. Well, mostly were black people living on Wood Street, Grove Street, and Elm Street, and Italians who lived on Morse Avenue, 1 or 2 on Elm Street, on Washington Avenue, and the surrounding area. And it was a very close, cohesive group here. We knew one another. We knew one another's families. We played together as kids. As kids, we played in the streets. In fact, in the late afternoons, the streets were crowded with kids. In fact, cars had trouble getting through. There weren't that many cars, but that was our playground. And we lived in the streets after school or during the summer. We had no computers in those days. When I was growing up in Rutherford, we could not buy homes in other areas of the town. They wouldn't. Real estate agencies wouldn't sell it to us. We lived on Wood Street, and it's just 1 block between Morse and Washington. Only that 1 block. The 1 block of Elm Street and the 1 block of Grove Street. Then there were 2 blocks down on the other side of town. Meadow Road, which was called Hook Road at one time, or Newark Turnpike at one time. And Spring Street, which became Eastern Way. Those were the only places that black families lived. There was one exception, a family named Walton, Christopher C. Walton. He lived on the corner of Woodland Avenue and Wheaton Place. He came here in 1908 from Richmond, Virginia. And he lived in New York, and he came over here, and he bought some property on a corner of, as I said, Wheaton and Woodland Avenue. And we couldn't figure out how he could buy property in a place like that when we weren't allowed to live in those areas. And later on, I got about 5, 6 years ago, Ted Van Winkle told me a story. He said that there was a very wealthy man who lived on Ridge Road. And when he died, he dedicated some land in that area for black people. And that was my answer, because no one had the answer of how a black man could live in that area. And Ted Van Winkle told me that that property was dedicated for black families. And that's how he started. He built 2 homes there and 1 home around the corner on Wheaton Place. And that's where a black family lived, in Wheaton Place, and 2 houses on Woodland Avenue. And by the way, mentioned in that house, which is a very interesting piece of history, the Laval family lived in that house. And they're the only family that we can find in the United States that had 6 sons that served in World War II at the same time.
Wow.
We could find no other anyplace else. I went to the state, the county, the state, the national, and we could not find any other post that had 6 people from one family that served in World War II at the same time. So that was very interesting, and we hopefully historical preservation is going to preserve that house.
Mm.
That was the mainstay of our community. We all turned to the church to minister for guidance, for help. We went to church. I went to church every Sunday. In the morning we'd have services for the children. We'd have the main church services at 11 o'clock. They even had an afternoon services and an evening service. The children had what we call BYP, which is the Baptist Young Christian Association, at 6 o'clock at night on a Sunday. So we were in church all day on Sunday. And this was probably the most important thing in our lives at that time, because there wasn't that much to do. We would go to church, we'd play games, we'd make up our own games in the street. There was very little activity in town. There was a YMCA at the time, and they had small things to do. We would play basketball in the gyms of the churches. And there was the Boy Scouts and the Cub Scouts. And not only our church, but all the churches participated in the Cub Scouts and the Boy Scouts. My first experience was in Troop 6, and that was the Baptist Church on West Passaic Avenue. That's the one that's right behind the post office. And that was my first experience as in the Boy Scouts. I also transferred to Troop 10, which was developed here in Rutherford at Mount Ararat Baptist Church on Elm Street. And that became part of our work. But these were the things that we did: going to church, playing in the street, Boy Scouts, Cub Scouts, and going to the Rivoli Theater. If you had 10 cents, you could go to the Rivoli Theater on a Saturday, or Friday night, or a Saturday. We weren't allowed to go to the movies on a Sunday. That was restricted. We had to go to church all day on Sunday. The community itself, being that we lived in a segregated section, we were very integrated as far as playing with the kids. We played with the white kids in the neighborhood. I had friends in town that I played with, and the school system was very well integrated. Never had any problems. But it was really, I thought, a great place to grow up. As a kid, I followed sports, football and basketball, track and baseball. In high school, I was very interested in sports like everyone else. I think in this town, if you didn't play football, they thought you were weren't right for the town. That was the big thing, playing football. Of course, not everyone played football, but I played football in high school. I played on the 1945 state championship football team. I played basketball, and I ran track in high school. And it was a great experience. The only bad experiences I had was when I participated in sports out of town. And some of the experiences were pretty bad. When I played in certain towns around here, especially Cliffside Park, the name calling was horrible. It was horrendous. It was just a bad place to be. Cliffside Park, Teaneck, and a couple of the other towns were pretty bad as far as the race relationship was concerned, because the acceptance just wasn't there. And playing football and basketball the same way, you know, you get the negative remarks and derogatory remarks, and it wasn't good. That was the only bad experience I had. But in town here, we had no bad experiences. Going from kindergarten right through high school, I can't remember one real bad experience that I had with any of the other ethnic groups. It was very compatible. In fact, you didn't know that you were not white. You know what I mean? Everybody felt that they were just about the same. We all seemed to be on the same level. And we had a lot of fun. Of course, you had to know your place, but that's another story. My father told me from day one that we were all going to be educated and going to college. And I said to him, something wrong here. We're living in a community. My mother and father both are working. We have enough food on the table. We have clothes on our backs. But that's about as far as it went. You know, we didn't have, I never traveled to Europe. I never traveled anyplace else. I couldn't go swimming in the swimming pools because we weren't allowed to swim in the swimming pools. The only place we could swim, there were two beaches. Now, New Jersey had probably one of the largest coasts in the country as far as beaches. And there were only two places that we could swim. That was Belmar and Kentucky Avenue in Atlantic City. The whole coast we could not swim. So we were very much restricted in what we could do. But my father was very instrumental, thinking ahead and always keeping a positive attitude that we could do everything. And he said I was going to college. I said, college? I said, half the kids were dropping out of high school because they had to go to work at the age 16 to support their family. I said, how's it? Couldn't believe it. But at the same time, during the 1930s, while my father and mother both were working, my father was going to college. And my father went to Rutgers and got a degree. And he became the first black social worker in Bergen County. He was the very, very first. And he was setting an example for us that it could be done. And he said to me, education, he said to my sister, was important. And when I came out of high school, I went into service because that was a commitment we all had. Then when I came out, I went to college. And from that point on, I was teaching this to all the kids, all my family. All of my family are educated. Every single, my siblings, my cousins, they're all very, very well educated. And it's taught in our family. And this is something that we look forward to. And it's a must, put it that way. And we now see the light. And that's all we talk about now is education. Education first. Anything else second. The integration on Park Avenue wasn't there. There were no minorities working in the stores to start with, not at all. There was an ice cream parlor that would not service other than you would come in and buy ice cream, come and walk out. You couldn't sit at the table and sit in the ice cream. There was a drugstore that had a counter, and we could not sit at the counter. You could come in, get your items, and move on. There were a couple of dry goods stores, clothing stores, and there was a furniture store. If you went in there, somebody would always walk around and watch you to see that you wouldn't touch anything or steal anything. So the eyes were on us at all times. We were accepted, and then we weren't accepted. But the avenue itself was the place that we had to go. You shop. 80% of your shopping was done on the avenue. The only other shopping we did, we would go to Passaic, which had a tremendous shopping area on Main Street. And that's where you would go. Pop would get paid on a Saturday. Saturday night, maybe you go up there and do some shopping. And they had a couple of clothing stores and and places to go. That was our other choice, because there were no malls, there were no chains, there were no big stores, big clothing chains, there were no big food chains and things like that. There was an A&P in Rutherford. That was the only store that I know connected to a chain. And then there was a meat market and a couple of stores that sold vegetables and so forth. And then we had vendors like the Goldfarb. They used to come around in a truck, and twice a week they'd come through the street with the truck, and you buy your groceries from that. And then we had a fisherman, Mr. Vincent, on Saturday mornings. He'd come here with his little green wagon and pull up in the street with the cats following him. You know, and he would sell us fish. But the avenue itself was the place to go. It was the place that we shopped. And we never had any real bad experiences, but again, there were restrictions. You could not eat it, sit down at these counters at these places I was talking about. They even tried this segregation at the Rivoli, and this is before my time. My uncle told me about this. He said that when the Rivoli first opened, they wanted to segregate it and have the minorities sit in the back. And my uncle went in there and sat in the front, and they tried to move him. He said, no. I said, son, I'm not moving. I came in this place, I paid my toll, I paid my tab, I'm here. It's not going to move. And they got stirred around. They tried to start something, but they didn't. And others came in there and just sat in the front. And so they said, well, they decided, oh, we're going to do it. But they tried it. And there was basically well, we had the ability to move around. We were mobile on the avenue. But again, as far as homes, we couldn't buy any homes. So the real estate agencies wouldn't even look at us when it came to purchasing a home or moving around a little in the area. But I went to the candy stores, I went to the clothing stores. Woolworth 5 and 10 was the big place. We walked through there, and we never had any problems. So basically, I would say that the avenue was a good place for us. It accepted us fairly well. But again, everything in those days, you had to know your place. There were no minorities working in the stores. You couldn't even get a job. You wouldn't even try. There was one lady I knew that worked in the bank, but she was passing for white. He was involved in politics far back as 1934. And he became very active in the political scene. And I've got some pictures of him, I got him in the next room, and reports where he was appointed by the governor of the state of New Jersey to a commission to investigate segregation of blacks in housing and industry and various things. And he spent a lot of time in that. My father became active with all of the politicians in the state of New Jersey. My father knew the governor firsthand. He knew all of the politicians and senators. He would go to Trenton and he would stand up with his grievances and stuff. He led commissions for several years. I have some plaques and stuff that were given to him. And he was very instrumental in making changes in segregation in Rutherford and even in the state of New Jersey, because the housing was the big thing. We were restricted where we could buy a house and so forth. And mentioning Harold Wallsfield, there was a problem with Wallsfield down there too, and my father was instrumental in that when they had a problem of the kids playing on that field, and they were going to restrict it.
So could you tell me what the problem with Mr. Wallsfield was?
Well, I don't know exactly because I was a little younger then, but I know I got an article about it. And what it was that I think they were going to restrict the minorities from the usage of the field. Maybe, I'm not sure whether it was not at all or just 1 or 2 days a week. And my father and the townspeople got together and they had a big to-do with it, and they finally straightened it out. Because there was another incident where they were going to build a swimming pool in Rutherford. And you know, that was a big no-no. Because the white people would have to swim with the black people, and they didn't want their pools contaminated. So, you know, they had a big fight about that. They was going to build it. down where Memorial Field is now. So they finally wound up getting a grant from the state, and they built the pool in the high school. And that way, the usage was for everyone. He fought for integration. He fought for the rights to swim on the beaches, statewide. This was a big statewide thing that they fought for. And also, when I was young in those days, if you go down to the beaches, you had to drive down. Now, when you drove down, there were no state highways. There was no parkway. There was no Garden State Parkway. There was no turnpike. And you had to go down Route 35, routes like that. There were little two-lane roads. And you couldn't stop and eat. They wouldn't serve you at the stands. And that was one of the things that my father fought for. I remember once we went down to Atlantic City, came back, couldn't go to the bathroom. All the way now, that's a long drive. No place to eat. And it was a very big problem. And my father was involved in that on a statewide basis. He had people come to meet in his house. They came from all over the state.
And that was here in Rutherford?
Here, right next door. They would come from Atlantic County. They would come from Burlington County. They would come from all over just to sit and come up with a program to help defeat it. And where my father was very instrumental is he got votes together. That was the big thing. And I guess that's why they listened to them. Because running for an office, you needed support. And in some towns, the black vote was very instrumental. And my father was instrumental in getting people together from all over the state. And they would vote based on the politics. Now, my father was a Republican. And in those days, the Republican Party was the choice. It was a party of Lincoln in those days. It really was. And the Republican governor was the one that got my father the commission. He was the one that okayed his commission to work and helping out, getting people into industry, help them get housing and things like that. During World War II was big because the factories needed workers and they integrated. In those days they weren't all integrated. You had blacks, whites working together in industry. Wrights, Bendix, all the big war plants. They were all together, working together. And that's what he did. And he would always write articles in the newspapers when it came up about what wasn't being done right. And he was very, very active and stayed on the back. He knew all the congressmen, all the senators, all the people. If anything came up, he'd get on the phone and call them. And they would come to the aid and it would help out. I'm vice president of the Rutherford High School Hall of Fame. That's my big thing, you know. You come here to talk sports, that's a big thing with me. And I am the historian. And I gather all the information and put it together and help us prepare for our inductions. And I have pictures going back to 1900 that I've gathered. I have uniforms that go back to the teens, gloves, footballs, and various artifacts that go back to the early days of Rutherford. I interviewed over 50 people, live interviews, and I have this written down that I'm going to put into my video that we're putting together. I am also president of the Historical Preservation here in town. And again, it goes back to history. Of course, history is important to me. Preserving the homes here in the town, I do a lot of work in that area. And I work with Rod Leith, as you know. He's on the commission with us. And we try our best to preserve homes here in town. We try to get people interested in looking at their homes and preserving their homes, because the history is so important. a lot of people just don't know what we have here in this town. Rutherford goes back to about, what is that, 1620 or something. It's an old town, and we were incorporated, I think, in 1881. But the Van Winkles have been here since day one. We have families like the Van Winkles and the Ely's. They have been here for a long, long time. And it's important that we preserve this history.